Hello again, friends, and welcome into another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right here on YouTube. And boy, this is why I spent money for StreamYard right here. I could die tomorrow and it don't get no better than this. Hell, I don't know what else to say. Pro Wrestling, read the title Pro Wrestling legend Tommy Angel of NWA, WCW, and WWF interview. Tommy Angel, what's going on, man?
Another peaceful Sunday here in South Carolina. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for doing it, man. You're my first live guest. Usually I have just myself on here talking about wrestling. So this is exciting, not only because you're a personal friend, but also because, contrary to what you may think of yourself, you are a pro wrestling legend. And lastly, anytime I watch these interviews with some people, not only with you, but with other wrestlers, it's always better to talk wrestling than it is to just be one person talking by yourself. So I really appreciate you coming on and everything. So I know you probably answered a lot of these questions that I'm going to ask you in some other interviews, but you haven't answered it here. So let me just start by saying, how and why did you get into pro wrestling?
Let's see. It all started when I got out of high school. I went straight into the Army. All my friends went on a summer vacation. School was out. They went to the beach. And about a week and a half after I got out of high school, I went straight into the Army to basic training. And I was 17. My parents had to sign me in because I was too young to sign up. So I started there for Fort Benning, went through jump school. And once that was over, about a month and a half of that and infantry training, I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So airborne infantry. And my MOS was 11 Hotel, which means I was a tow gunner, anti-tank. And then back in that time, Ronald Reagan was the president. The biggest threat to the United States was the USSR. So I wanted to be on the front lines, busting tanks. We got towards the end of my time at Fort Bragg. That was about 1985. I wanted, they kept trying to, they always get you try to re-enlist into the military. And I was looking at being a helicopter pilot. And I'd already gained a bunch of weight and was watching wrestling on the weekends. And they said, well, the first thing you have to do is in flight school, you have to drop some weight. And I was kind of disappointed because I'd worked so hard to get this weight. And I thought about it. And after a few weeks, I decided I wanted to get out of the military and pursue professional wrestling. And looking back, if I'd have stayed in, I probably could have retired as a pilot and then commercial pilot, but God had other plans. So I was out living in Fayetteville and working out. And we just kept going down to the Cumberland County Arena there in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where the NWA would do house shows. And we'd always bug the guys that would come out of the dressing room, usually on the babyface side. And two of the guys that we saw most frequently was Gene Ligon and Don Carnoodle. We kept saying, "We're getting the business. We're getting the business." Like, yeah, whatever, kids. You guys are in the military, should stay in. It's a rough business. I was 21 years old and jacked up, and I was like, whatever, I want to get in. And finally, I think the second or third time we went down to the matches, Gene
Can I
said,
stop you
you
right
guys,
there for a second?
okay.
I was just going to ask you before you continue on with the story. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to stop you right there. Do you think they said? Do you think they said stay in the military because the business was so protected back then, and they didn't let? This is the part that I don't think other interviews that I've watched with you or other people before I had StreamYard and the capability to do this. I don't think this comes out a lot, but back in, I'm going to say our day, I was never a wrestler, but I was a fan and I met you after wrestling. But back during the days when we were so into wrestling, wrestling was very protected, as you know, and not everybody got into it, even if they wanted to get into it. And number two point, you didn't have a wrestling school on every corner. So do you think Gene Ligon and Don Kernodle were trying to protect the business and keep you out of it? Or do you think
Absolutely.
They just were trying to see how bad you really wanted it.
I think it was the first point you made is they were discouraging us because they did protect the business. It was a whole different business back then, and there were no wrestling schools that I knew of. And when by the third time we went to see Gene, he had heard that Jim Crockett Promotions, the NWA, was opening up their own.
Probably yeah, that's true. Probably about the only wrestling school back then might have been a Monster Factory, but most guy in New Jersey, but most guys just train wrestlers out of their back yard or a gym somewhere. I know that Gene Anderson and Johnny Weaver, who you both knew, who you knew, both of them, which we'll get into later. But I know that they said they used to train guys at a YMCA, and they didn't have a ring in Charlotte at the YMCA, Charlotte, North Carolina, but that they trained guys just to own some gym mats. So I guess people got training wherever they could. But nowadays, there's a wrestling school on every corner, and that's both good and bad. But we won't get into all that. But finish your story. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Well, also be aware there's a major delay between us, so it's just account for that time in case I don't know how to look on the recording part. But anyway, around the second or third time, Gene said, "Hey, the NWA's actually opened up a wrestling school, and it's going to be around this time. But call the office, NWA office, in a few weeks." And we did, and someone answered and told us, gave us a date and an address, and said the tryouts are going to be this date in Mooresville, North Carolina. I had no idea what it was. Back then it was pre-internet. So me and a buddy of mine who were working out in the gym I was at, I was already out of the military, so trying to grow my hair, but we both drove up to try out. It was a Saturday, and the address took us right to Nelson Royal's Western store right there in Highway 150. We thought, this is weird, because right next to his store is this big barn, and you can see horses in there and stuff. But we went in the store and asked this nice lady who was at the counter. We said, "This is where the wrestling tryouts?" She said, "Sure is, honey." And she said, "What you going to do is wait right here. We're going to take everybody up later, a little bit later, when everybody's here." Turns out it was Nelson's wife, Karen. So we went out in the parking lot, and more guys kept showing up, and we eyeballing each other. And then Nelson and Gene came out of nowhere and just said, "All right, boys, hop in your vehicles, follow us. We're just going to go right around the corner, go up Highway 50 about 100 yards and go follow us down this driveway." So we followed them down there, and we parked, and there's this big aluminum building. Looked like it used to be an old machine shop or something, but there was a big ring right in the middle of it. And he said, "Before we go in there, follow us." So we walked down, we walked through this pasture, huge pasture, multiple acres. And then also there's hills and ruts. It was just very overgrown. And it basically said, "All right, this is very serious, no clowning around. This is serious business." And everybody make sure we paid our deposits at the store. I think it was like $350. He said, "This is a tryout. If you don't make it, it's non-refundable." We had to sign a waiver and everything. So we started running around this big giant field. And after about 3 or 4 laps, they said, "All right, now we're going to do fireman carries. If you don't know what that is," and demonstrated it. So we had to fireman carry guys back and forth. And then the second time it was up a hill, and it was a hot day, and I just got out of the military, so I was in great shape. But some of them guys were sucking wind. So we did that drill, and then we did we're trying to do wind sprints, but it's hard to do in an overgrown field. And while that was done, it was about 40 minutes. We walked over to that building and got in the ring, and then Italian Stallion was there, and Brad Anderson's adopted son. All his kids were adopted, but Brad was there. And I said, "All right, each guy get in the ring. We're just going to see if you know any kind of wrestling moves." And Stallion was trying to shoot on everybody, just try to pin them to see if they knew how to wrestle out of it. And Brad Anderson he was a good amateur wrestler. He was in the high school system then, but he was like ranked in the state or something. So he got into the smaller guys. So I had Stallion, but he kept trying to pin me, and I never wrestled, but I was super strong, and I had a pissed off attitude, like I'm not gonna let you pin me. So we went through that, and then finally got up, and then after all that was done, it was probably like, I don't know, 12 or 14 of us, I think. And then Gene and Nelson said, "All right, boys, everybody stand right here. We'll be right back. We're going to discuss who we think is going to make the class, the first class, who's not." And so we sat around for a few minutes, and I was talking to my buddy. His name is Keith. And we're like, "Man, I feel like I did pretty good." "Yeah, I do too, Tommy." And so we'll be interested to see what happens. And they came back in and said, "All right, we call your name. You stand over on that side, and everybody remain here." And he kept calling these names. Everybody kept going to the other side, and they weren't calling my name or Keith's name. I was like, "Dang." And it turns out all the guys they called to go over there are the ones that weren't going to make the class. Everybody was sitting on our side stayed. You can see the disappointment in those guys' faces. They went outside, talked to them, wished them well, and said, you can basically, when we open up the camp, you can come back and try out. And they came back to us and gave us an overview of what to expect over the next 3-4 months of training, when it was going to happen, and how much it cost.
What do you think? What do you think they were looking for during the train out? I mean, during the not train out training. Do you think they were looking for somebody with conditioning, or do you think they were looking for somebody that had strength or somebody that had wrestling moves?
Mostly it was just after I got to know Nelson and Gene, just that if you had a coachable attitude, and if you had any kind of athletic ability, because they're going to train us to move. I had no amateur background, and they said, we're going to teach you the moves you need. Some of them are amateur style, but this is a different style. But the interesting thing was, for the first 3 months, they didn't smarten us up and let us know what the business was really about. And so me and my buddy Keith would ride back and forth at Fayetteville every week, coming to camp, and be like, "I don't know, they ain't said anything, like it's fake or rigged. So I guess we better be prepared if they're going to start punching us in the face." And then we got a few weeks away from the end. And once again, the Crocker Promotions created this school. And Gene was an employee of NWA. So he was the employee at the school monitoring all this. And he said, basically, "All right, kids, we're going to go on TV in about a month from now. And Angel, you, and you are going to go." And I want to say it was David Isley, Cougar J, Colt Steele, Mitch Snow, and another guy. I can't remember who they were, but we were going to go down there, and they basically said, "All right, this is the point we're going to smarten you up. This is what really happens. Now we're going to start tuning you up to get ready for those TV appearances." So that helped us a lot. But I remember telling all my friends back at Fort Bragg,
It's important.
"I'm going to be on TV tonight,
Sure.
man." No, you're not. I think if you're going to, instead of interrupting each other, we'll raise
I
our
was
hand.
just
That
going
way
to
I can
say it's
stop.
important to remember that. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, if you want to make me pause, just wave your hand and I'll stop, because there's that delay, because you'll start talking and it goes, and then we step all over each other.
Yeah, sorry about that. Must be a bad internet connection. Over here, I live in an apartment building, third floor, and sometimes that internet connection is not as reliable as it need to be.
You're going to ask something?
I forgot what I was going to ask. Go ahead and finish your story. Oh, I know what it was now. It's important to remember that those guys you mentioned, Mitch Snow, Italian Stallion, and those others, probably most people around the country would only remember George South or Italian Stallion. Some of those others wrestled in the South and didn't make it to even your level as quite as good as you did. You worked in NWA, WCW, WWF, and then the independents too. But some of those others, some people around the country might not remember that.
Yeah, with George South and Italian Stallion were already in the business when I got in, but the other guys that I mentioned, I don't think they got as much TV time. To your point, but once we got we're booked on television, we would continue to go back each week down to Turner Techwood Drive in the Turner Studios, the old pipe and drape, where you saw a big curtain and a row of people and one down the side, and the hard cameras on one side with Tony Schiavone and David Crockett, and we would be looking at the hard camera when we'd start the matches.
Yeah, and even before that, even before the Crockett's took over that time slot in 1985. That was where they originally taped Georgia Championship Wrestling. So most of us and when I say Georgia Championship Wrestling, I mean the original Georgia Championship Wrestling that was owned by Ole Anderson and Jim Barnett, and then later Vince McMahon for a short time before Crockett paid Vince McMahon $1 million for the time slot and got it back. And that's where the term Black Saturday came from, because they had taken the original Georgia Championship Wrestling off and put on Vince McMahon's program. And there was supposed to be an agreement between Vince McMahon and Ted Turner that Vince would do a live WWF show down there, but he kind of reneged on that. And that's where they had a falling out and stuff. And then Crockett bought the time slot, and then you guys came in. So pick it up from there.
Yeah, the intent of the school, as Nelson and Gene explained it to us, was that as that transition was happening, but also that the television ratings were going to struggle because the way that they'd written the TV, the job guys would go out and get squashed. So they were training us to be the next level up, competitive young talent. They called us young lions, and going to cut our teeth in the NWA and try to be one day champions. So we really worked at our craft, and once we were out of school, everybody went back to where they came from, and they would just wait for the bookings. But I'd grown pretty close to Nelson and his family, and he said, "Son, I think you got something here. We'd like you to, you could stay on the trail on our property and you continue training." So I said, "Boy, that'd be great." So I moved out of Fayetteville to the trailer on Nelson's property and rented that with another guy, the guy that took care of all his livestock, his horses and steer and all that. And so I was literally every day I could go to the local gym, work out, and then go in the ring and work out. There's a couple guys did the same thing, but they were living a little bit further out, like Concord and Charlotte. So I was continuously training after I got out of school, and I think that helped me the most.
Let's go back to something else you said earlier. If I heard you correctly, and again, we are working under adverse circumstances here with bad internet on my end, but if I heard you correctly, you said after you were accepted into the school and you passed the tryout, is that when they smartened you up, or did you get smartened up about the business like before your first match, that this was really a show and not a perceived athletic contest?
It was literally a few weeks before we were told we were booked on television. So for the first 3 months, it was pretty much kayfabe is what they say in the business. They wouldn't smart. We kept saying, "Oh, come on, this is all set up," and they would be adamant, saying, "No, it's not. No, it's not." So it was. I guess too, they just wanted to make sure we were smart, because I did early on in my time on television, I made a terrible mistake about saying a little bit too much about the business to a girl I was dating in Fayetteville, and she used to go to the matches, and apparently still did, and she told some of the guys that what I said, not trying to get me in trouble, but I got back to the office, and so I spent a short time out of the business. Nelson said, "Son, I believe you're blackballed," and I said, "I don't know what that means." He goes, "They're not going to book you anymore." And It was one Friday coming up for camp, and he pulled me aside, and it broke my heart. I'd gone through all that time and sacrifice to get through the school. And he said, "Keep training, keep your head in it, but we'll just take this as it comes." And so I kept training, understanding that I might never make it back in the business, but I learned a valuable lesson. You protect the business at all costs, and so that I did. But once once they smartened us up, that's when we went back in the ring for the final few weeks to tune ourselves up for that first television match. We knew how it worked. Like when you were on standby before you're called out to go on the live shot. From that to the understanding the finish and what the ref's going to say or do, and just having us a better idea so we wouldn't go out there and look like fools and embarrass the top talent.
Yeah. As of this recording, some of your statements about the girl was breaking up, but knowing you as long as I do, let me see if it comes through on my end. So what you're saying is Nelson pulled you aside during the training because you had said something to the girl that you were dating about the business being fixed or predetermined. And in that era, and we're talking early 80s to mid 80s, in that era, kayfabe, as they call it, was still uh, adhered to, at least on the NWA side. I know on the WWF side, they finally broke kayfabe in '87, but they still didn't take it as seriously as the guys did in the NWA, especially in the southern parts of the country. So basically, you got reprimanded by Nelson for telling the girl something about the business. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, the office told him that word got back to the office. They told Nelson and Gene, obviously Gene who told Nelson, and he's the one that broke it to me. And he's telling me, he said, "You understand the severity of this? If I'd have found out first, I'd did the same thing too." I said, "Yes, sir." So I just kept training, kept my head down, and when I finally was said I could go back, I minded my P's and Q's. I showed up, I worked hard and left. I wanted to I knew I had to earn their trust back.
Yeah. And I've known you for a long time, so I don't think it was you trying to expose the business. I think it was just you talking to somebody that you thought would keep things quiet, especially a girl you were dating at the time. And obviously, she didn't keep it quiet. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this as a 21, almost 22-year-old kid trying to impress a girl, you know, trying to talk your way into situations, and loose lips sink ships. That's what I learned in the military. You think I would have applied that knowledge in that situation, but I was able to. They accepted I went up to and apologized personally, and I think even though they might not have cared, but it was a matter of character for me. I said, "Look, my intent was not to expose the business," and I think they understood that. I wasn't like going around telling everybody I was, trying to impress a girl. That was dumb. So, I earned my trust back, and I was able to start working regularly on TV again.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I'm glad you were able to earn their trust back and start working on TV there. In that era, though, you really got lucky because I know some other people that might have done that. Who I won't mention their names here. That's kind of trying to protect the guilty, but there were some others that did it back in those days, and they didn't get the same second chance that you did. In fact, they got the hell beat out of them. So you really got a second chance, even though you didn't mean nothing bad by it. Um, where should we go from here?
Yo, interview, you tell me. My experience in the NWA, how I transitioned
Yeah,
out of the
yeah, let's.
NWA.
Yeah. Okay. What was your first match in the NWA, and what did you think after the first match?
My first match was a singles match, and it was against Baron von Raschke, and I had no idea who he was. He was in the era before me, but it was underwhelming. But I was on television. I have butterflies, and just like the same kind of butterflies you get right before you jump out of an aircraft. But it was a simple match. He got the claw on me. I went down, and as a young guy just jacked up on steroids, I'm thinking there's no way in the world somebody's going to believe this older looking man's going to come up with his hand and grab my head. But I was told this, the whole idea was to make him look like he was a killer. So I did, and was just very excited to have the opportunity. They said, "All right, now we're going to do the second taping. Here's the names on the list." And I was in a tag team with, I can't remember who it was, but it was against the Rock and Roll Express, and that was a little more action. And the Rock and Roll Express were on fire back in the mid '80s.
Sure thing was. Rock and Roll Express were legends back then, and in case people don't know, that was Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson, and I think they've hung it up as a tag team, but Ricky Morton is still out there working single matches on the independent circuit as well as working with his son Kerry Morton. But Robert Gibson, Reuben Kane, got out of the business. I think at the end of this past year, he married somebody that was, I guess pretty wealthy, and she wanted him to call it up, so he gave it up and everything. But Ricky's still rocking and rolling out there.
Hence the name.
Okay, so how long after you were working in the NWA did the WWF stuff start coming, and how did all that progress?
It was probably I started about 3/4 way through '86 on television. It was somewhere in 1988. We had the opportunity to go up there, and it was something that Nelson told us. He said that if you decide to go up there, you may burn bridges with the NWA. And to me, the WWF was the pinnacle. I wanted to be up there. It was like Barnum and Bailey circus compared to the local county fair, as far as production, just the bigness of it to me. So I said, I want to go. I'll take that risk. And obviously, we got up there, we were comparing apples and apples, and it was just a whole different world. Obviously they did all their shows in a can. They'd film week 1 through week 4 all in one day. And so I always tell people, you can tell if on televisions, if people take photographs of him. I take a photo in the first match, my hair is all big and looking cool with mousse in it. And by the fourth match, you're trying to get your hair looking the way it was. You've wrestled 3 or 4 times. You've been sweaty. Your hair is flat. You don't like those pictures. Back in the '80s, it was all about your hair. You're cool. But they had a buffet, out there all day long with drinks available so you could hydrate. Where Crockett Promotions, man, you did a TV is like you had to figure out what was like in the Techwood Drive. Hey, Rusty's gone. I'll keep talking. Techwood Drive, we knew there was a convenience store down the road. And so we'd send one guy down there to buy a bunch of microwave burritos and chew on those. Those weren't that good. I'll pause in case Rusty comes back. We'll take this opportunity for a commercial break. So, his device is not connected. I'm guessing this is going to end the interview now. This was just a test run. Thank you for playing.
I'm there. Can you hear me now? Can you see me now?
I can. Did you hear me the whole time?
Yeah, I could hear you the whole time, but I couldn't see you. And then all of a sudden it went out. It was just a lot of things. So please excuse the technical difficulties there, people. I think I'm going to be able to edit this together, but if not, please excuse the technical difficulty. As I said, Tommy is my first guest trying to do this twice. And I mean, interview with two people on the screen, and the internet connection is a little bit bad here, so please forgive us. But anyway, Tommy, continue on with your story. Last I heard was somewhere around you were on NWA TV from like 85 to 88, and then somewhere in or 87, and then you went up there in 86 or 87. That was about all I got.
It was 86, about the middle of 86 from the NWA until about early 88, mid 88 that we went up to WWF. And it was just comparing the two, you know, the pay was more. And obviously they're based out of Stamford, Connecticut. So all their TVs were all along the northeastern seaboard around those towns, you know, Connecticut, New York, places like that. But it was just the bigger cities. So that the houses looked huge. You know, we were doing pipe and drapes. We did some television around the Carolinas, and they were selling those buildings out too. Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium, Dorton Arena in Raleigh, the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina. Where else? The Columbia Township. I think that's what it's called down in Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, the Columbia Township Auditorium in Columbia, South Carolina.
That's right. All great venues for the wrestling, but you know, we were going into gigantic arenas with the WWF, and although Crockett was selling out, the WWF was filling buildings with 15, 20,000 people, and some of them, you know, and it was really cool, but not. It was a better experience for the guys at my level because we got to access to food all day, so we could eat. There was juices and waters all day, so you could stay hydrated. Where we were doing Techwood Drive, the only thing that was around was a convenience store. So we'd like paper, rock, scissors, right? Who's going to go get the food today? And, you know, so they had like a 7-Eleven, so you microwave burritos or hot dogs. Whoever the guy went down there, chuck them in the microwave, bring them back, and we'd swallow those things down best we could. But that was the only nutrition during the day. The top guys, they could have people run down or deliver food to them or whatever. So it was just a very big contrast where WWF, everybody had access to the same stuff.
Yeah, well, I think part of the problem, looking at it with hindsight being 2020, with Crockett Promotions being out of business now since '88, and the WWF later become WWE, and they're the big, evil empire. But and they're the brand that everybody knows. But part of the reason they're the brand that everybody knows is because they were based out of New York at the time, and still are, to my
Did you freeze?
out of here for some reason.
Look like you froze.
There I am. I'm back. That wasn't me. That was the internet connection. So
I thought you might have went into a catatonic state.
boy, I tell you, this interview is not only going to be about pro wrestling, but it's going to have some good comedy in it too, with all these technical difficulties we're having here.
Might as well have fun, brother.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say, we only got about 20 minutes left, but what I was trying to say was because of the the WWF, now WWE's stronghold in the Northeast, and being in the New York media market, which is like the second largest media market in the country, they had, even back then, advantages that the NWA or any other WCW or any other kind of major wrestling promotion did not have. So I get your point that you went from selling out arenas and stuff in the southern part of the country, Charlotte, Columbia, Fayetteville, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was all good. But when you go to New York and all those other places, those are just bigger venues.
Yeah, definitely. It was apples and apples. That's what it was. And so, Both companies, great experience for me at my level, just learning and trying to progress into the business. So that's all we were. We're students of the business. We knew our role. We all had aspirations of being top guys, and that's what I worked hard for 8 years trying to do. But ultimately, I didn't reach my goal. But I feel very good about the effort I put into the business.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in talking to you privately, as we've known each other, we should tell the viewers here since about 1995. In talking to you privately, I will confess to you that you did not reach the level of, say, a John Cena or a Ricky Steamboat or anybody of that level. But by the same token, especially years later after the business was over for you and David, as in David Isley, another guy that was with you, and different things like that. Aren't you shocked by how many people are like contacting you saying, "Hey, can you do this podcast? Can you do this interview?" And tell us about your recent experience at the Fan Fest that you just had.
Sure. Um, yeah, it is amazing to me after all these years. It's been 30 plus years since I've been on television. And, obviously I look a whole lot different. I used to have hair and muscles. But the people find you on the internet and, I don't put anything out there about Tommy Angel. It's just I go by my real name, Tommy Barrett, and people send pictures or cards and ask for autographs. And it's very humbling, and I'll graciously accommodate because, you know, all these years later, it's crazy to me. And they just did the 20th anniversary of the first Fan Fest in Charlotte this past Friday. I don't know when this will come out. So it was week of Valentine's Day that Friday. It was February 16th, I think. But up there is the old stomping grounds of the NWA. It was at the Hyatt House, which is a new hotel right in uptown, what they call it Center City, Charlotte, right across the street almost from the Spectrum Arena. So they're trying to piggyback off. There's people going to the show. I was there from noon to 4 with a bunch of great guys: Chuck Coates, David Isley, Bill Eadie, the Mulkamania, Baby Doll, David Crockett, Jimmy Valiant, Boogie, Rick Link. There's a lot of guys there. It was a lot of fun and fans coming up, and it was a free event to them, but they had to pay if they wanted an autograph. So if they paid $10, you get a signed autograph picture, plus you get a selfie. It was a good fan experience, but just talking to people that remembered some of the venues we wrestled in from years ago or a certain match that you had, it was just really fun catching up. And as interesting as it is for them to see us, some of those people I recognize, I'm like, oh my God, Rusty's gone again, so I'll just keep talking. But one of our biggest fans, her name's Myra, she always shows up and cheers us up. So it was good to see a lot of people. One guy came down from Indiana. There was some people from Ohio. Some of them came up from Atlanta area. So really fun.
And just in case, because we were having some technical difficulties, just in case the people didn't hear the first part of your statement, that was February the 9th, I believe it was, as we're recording this. But anyway, the point
Yeah,
is,
you're right.
it was it was done as a, because I got bits and pieces of your statement there, so let me repeat it just in case people didn't hear it, because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to edit this or not. But what you were saying was the promoter Greg Price wanted to do it as a 20th anniversary because he was the one that invented the Fan Fest, and made it so popular before everybody else started coming in. So it was the 20th anniversary of that, but also he wanted to piggyback off the WWE SmackDown event that was in Charlotte at the Spectrum Arena there. So pick it up from there.
Absolutely. It was Greg Price's show. He was the first. He was on the cutting edge of doing a fan fest. It was 3 days, 20 years prior to this past fan fest. It was at the Hilton University place, 3 days, and it was a lot of talent were there that were still alive. A lot of fans came. It was a 3-day event, just a blast. So I was blessed to be a part of that first one. So he wanted to get as many people that were at the first one for this one. But Greg is, he's always been on the forefront of stuff to do. And when he took a break, I understood why. It's just a lot of effort on his time and money and all the other stuff that goes with it. But when he said he was bringing it back, we were all excited. And I think it's a new model. It's free events. You're not charging for all these different things, but so he's got something to work with. So we're all trying to figure out how we can help him do this in different cities, because I think it'll be viable to get the recognition of that Euro wrestling, more opportunities to present themselves to a generation that may not remember or even know about.
Well, that's true, and especially since if you take it to other areas, that would allow people in other areas to be able to see it, maybe without having to get a hotel or something and add an additional expense in this economy. And that way, if they have more disposable income, they're able to buy more pictures and shirts and memorabilia instead of spending most of their money on a hotel or airfare flying to one location. So I agree with you. Is there any indication that he's going to do that in the future, take it to different cities?
Yeah, you see, I had a conversation with him, just myself, and he he expressed that, and I told him wholeheartedly I believe that it would be successful. So I'm going to help him on some ideas that I have, and other people will as well. But he's ultimately it's up to him. But I think he sees the potential in it, and I do too. So I think people are hungry for it. I mean, if somebody in Indiana drove down, he used to live in Kannapolis or Concord, but he heard about it and wanted to come back home and see it. His brother still lives in the area, so they met, and it was really cool to hear their story and the matches and how old they were when they used to come watch us.
Well, that's interesting because if you took and I'm just speaking about United States here. I know you what hasn't come out yet. You did do a tour of Japan at one point wrestling, but you spent the majority of your career in the 8 years that you were in the business in the United States. But if you took that United States and you split it in half like a sandwich, I would say probably those of us that lived in the South, the southern parts of the country, were more into the realistic NWA style, to where the WWF was more showmanship and Hollywood and that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see that somebody would drive down to Charlotte, North Carolina, where this happened, and drive down from Indiana to see the NWA guys instead of just waiting for a WWF style show.
Correct, and they were WWF was a different product versus NWA. To your point, NWA was more about good versus evil, the heel and the baby face, and house matches. The heel would work a body part for 20-30 minutes, and the match would last 40-45, and the outcome would be after that usually the baby face would come back and win. So there was different products, but they were both protected in the same way as far as kayfabe and stuff. But yeah, Vince has always been more on the entertainment side. But back in that era, they were closer to wrestling than they ever been now.
That's true. I told you I'd only keep you an hour, so giving you a time check about 17 minutes. Long story short, give me some names of some people that you really learned a lot from and respected in the business. I know you said Gene and Nelson Royal was a prominent baby face, mostly in the South or southern part of the country. I think in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and parts of the 80s. And Gene, of course, was Gene Anderson of the famous Minnesota Wrecking Crew. But beyond those two, who else did you learn a lot from in the wrestling business?
Well, I want to go back to Gene and Nelson because that's the most important for me. I think all the guys went to that school. The foundation of our learning was based on a true baby face and a true heel. So we understood the business as a whole of how it works, because they didn't really tell any of us young guys if we're going to be babyface or heel. So we learned both sides of the business, and that was invaluable because I see people today, if I randomly check on the television, that I don't think there's, it's just finish and move, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy kind of thing. But the more influences that came from, probably, I know Brad Armstrong was great. He was always, we were always picking his brain because he was a tremendous athlete, just a gifted worker. Kurt Hennig for me was another one. He was really important in my pouring into me and what he learned and sharing with me and helping me after matches. He would, hey, next time think of this, or he'd ask me why I did something. He'd tell me a better way to do it. So just those two off the top of my head, but there's always a lot of guys. Nikita Koloff was a mentor of mine in the ring and out of the ring. His was more about keeping my head straight in the business and not getting caught up in all the dumb stuff. So that was probably, as we prepare to land the plane on this podcast, is that, he got out of the business at end of 83. I got around the beginning of 94. Both circumstances that he faced and I faced were the reasons why. Obviously, his first wife had passed away and my dad had committed suicide. But even after we left the business, we've been in close contact over the years. And so he's the most important man in my life from the wrestling business. Are you catatonic or freeze?
That's interesting. Talk about just your relationship with Nikita, but this is something that don't come out in some of the other interviews. Is talk about your faith.
Well, yeah, the Nikita's, I saw what he was going through when Mandy first got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and the effect it was having on his life. And, he lived in Concord and we were living and training in Mooresville, and he had a gym in Concord. So we would see him periodically when he was off the road, and, he had a ring and we'd come up there and help work out and stuff. But he didn't have to take a liking to any of us. He was a top star, and but he's just a very genuine, humble guy. He told us how he got in the business. But when I saw him going through what she was going through, I remember we were in Danville, Virginia, and we were doing a small show, and she was overseas somewhere trying to experimental treatment that wasn't approved in America. And his buddy, close friend of ours, Dwight, came and I saw him talking to him, and they both put their heads down and hugged, and Nick went in the shower. And after he came out, I could just tell he was just, he'd been crying. And I said, brother, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. He said, the treatment didn't work. She's, they don't give her any time to live. And she came back to the States, and it wasn't a whole lot longer. I can't remember the length of time, but she ended up passing away. And that's when he realized that he needed Christ in his life, and he got out of the business to pursue ministry. That's his new gimmick. He was the Russian nightmare in the wrestling business. Now he's Satan's nightmare in the world. And after, he didn't know my circumstances, but my father I called home beginning of 94, trying to make a bet on the Super Bowl. He and I never had a good relationship, and finally started rekindling that based on the only commonality we've ever had is he was in the military and I was in the military. So trying to rekindle that relationship and come back home, the prodigal son. And some guy answered the phone. He said, hey, who's this? I said, never mind that. Who's this? This is Detective so-and-so. I said, well, I'm trying to call my father, Tom Barrett. Is he there? No, he's not. He said, once again, who are you? I said, I'm his son, Tom Jr. He said, well, I'm sorry to inform you, your father's deceased. I was like, what? And so that was the unraveling right there. And it was up in Virginia. I was still in North Carolina, but I had the daunting task of calling my mom and my siblings and explaining what was going on. And my father was never excited about me getting out of the military to pursue wrestling. You're a dumbass. There's better things in your life to do. So I thought there's a lot of merit to what he was saying. The business was trending down. My hairline was receding, and I just wasn't having fun anymore. I didn't enjoy it. And I decided to walk away one day, and that was it. And I called both offices and just said, "Hey, I decided I'm not going to work anymore." They're like, "You sure?" I said, "Yeah, I appreciate it. All the work you give me and support. I'm very appreciative, but it's time for me to move on." And it was very unceremonious, very underwhelming, but that was it for me after 8 years.
You, you are more, as we're getting ready to land the plane here, got about 9 minutes left. As you are more familiar with this than I am, both in your faith in God. I mean, I believe in God, and we study. It's important to let the people know that we study God each week with the Bible and things. But beyond that, I've never had anybody go through suicide. I knew somebody, a mutual friend of ours, Don Kernodle, who committed suicide. And that's still terrible because I talked to Don about 3 weeks before his death, and there was no indication whatsoever that he was going to commit suicide. And you and I both knew Don personally. And since we both knew Don, I think you can agree that that was a shock. But to my point, as that relates to you, how were you able to recover as Tommy Barrett, not necessarily Tommy Angel, but Tommy Barrett, when you found out your father passed away? Was it a rekindling of your faith even before Nikita helped you with your faith, or was it something else?
Well, I was raised in the Catholic Church, so I knew right away. I had a knowledge of God, but I knew I needed Him. And I'm a slow learner, and that was just the beginning of my journey. So over the course of time, when I got into the radio business, I met the lady who would become my wife one day. But through that journey of trying to, I'm still broken and still trying to deal with my dad's death. But we got pregnant with our first child, and then she had to give birth prematurely because she was having cardiac problems. Some of her organs were developing outside her body, our daughter. And they said, we got to induce labor if there's any chance of saving her life. And my wife Peggy was in labor for 72 hours, hoping this child would come out so we could save it. By the time she did give birth, she lived for, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, but I held her in my hands. And that was the most helpless, broken feeling I ever had in my life, was just to see my child, this is a beautiful little girl, and she's going to leave the world. And that was just another step in a brokenness in my life. But 2 years later, we had the birth of our son, Chris. Some joy returned. And then a couple of years later, the economy collapsed and I found myself out of work. I was in the nonprofit world. So that was very humbling, but it was that crisis, I went from being the breadwinner to not bringing any money in. And so we had to file bankruptcy after about 9 months, put a short sale our home, trying to save ourselves and keep ourselves solvent. And then, that's right about the same time her and I found a good church up in Charlotte, went to it. I took an opportunity and job down here and found the same type of church. And my faith has grown exponentially because I know that I'll see my daughter again in heaven. That's my faith. Jesus Christ died for our sins so we could have eternal life with Him. By the grace and mercy of His Father, our Father, which is my hat, YHWH, for those who try to figure out the logo. It's Hebrew spelling for God. But now Nikita Koloff and Lex Luger both have a camp called Man Camp, and you can get on the internet. It's mancamp.info. And basically twice a year, April and October, down in Georgia, Royston, Georgia, it's a 5-day camp for men. I've been through it. I've been through another 5-day men's event with Nikita, and it radically transformed my life. It saved my life. And it's all about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with everybody I can, because that period I went through was so dark. I was so broken and so lost. And Jesus was the light that brought me back. And I've been blessed beyond measure since I started following Him. We live in a very beautiful home here in South Carolina. You know, we're both blessed. Our son will be 18 this year. He's a monster. He'll never go into business though. I'll tell you that. So we just been so blessed, and I still go down as an alumni to the man camp every April and October and serve the men who are going through. And it's to see the joy in these men's faces on the meal after they've been fasted for 24 hours and they graduate the next morning is the joy unstoppable. You'll never see that look on anybody's face until they realize they've been saved. And so that's my purpose in life now, is just these podcasts, is to share good old stories, but also where I am now.
Well, that's very good testimony. Let me ask you something else about that, because a lot of people, I don't mean this the way it's going to come out. It's not meant to be anything wrong, but a lot of people say that the wrestling business, myself included, has a lot of darkness to it. And so, how were you able to take that darkness and turn it into light? Do you think it was a combination of your father committing suicide, plus Nikita, plus your faith in God, and then later on your wife's miscarriage and things like that? Do you think it was a combination of everything, or can you put your finger on it?
Well, it wasn't a miscarriage. She gave birth. Her heart's daughter just wasn't strong enough. There wasn't enough time to save her life. Um, but the darkness I was going through, that's just the normal brokenness of a human being. The light was coming into Jesus Christ, and the only time biblically the Christians say when you're going through the valley of the shadow of death, that's Psalm 23. That's what it feels like when you're rock bottom, and the only place to look is up. And that's when I found Jesus Christ, and that's the light. That's what shines gets rid of all the darkness. That's what takes away all the hurt, the brokenness. Um, so he takes ashes and makes them into beauty. You know, he we see crosses, he sees an empty tomb. I mean, it's just, if you're looking to get rid of the baggage that you're not meant to carry, give it to Jesus Christ. So mancamp.info, MANCAMP, mancamp.info. If you're a guy and you're looking for a life-changing experience, and by two of the best guys in the world, world-class wrestling champions in their own right, plus just good Christian men, Lex Luger and Nikita Koloff.
I could not agree with that more. And in the remaining 3 minutes that we have with you, first of all, Tommy, I want to thank you for your volunteering your time, because it's not like this is a big production podcast. And I hope that the people will, I mean, I looked before we started and it was like 45,000 views since I started in March of 2020. 45,000 views, but only 271 subscribers. So take that for what it's worth. On one hand, 45,000 is good, but only 271 subscribers. It's not that good. So I guess it depends on how you look at it. But long story short, in the remaining 3 minutes we got, let me throw three names at you. Another guy that was able to transform his really bad life and turn it into a good life and was a witness for Christ, Ivan Koloff. What can you say about Ivan that passed away in 2017? What can you say about him as a wrestler and as a human being?
Wrestling wise, I mean, his best days were before I got into business, but he was still a consummate professional. I've watched all his old matches. He was the best to me, and just a genuine sweetheart in real life, just a lovely human being to be around. And he'd give you the shirt off his back, and he was always offering help and suggestions of developing us too. So he was also an influence to a lot of us young guys, me included, just on his wisdom of the business, and he would share it freely.
I agree. I knew him, as you know, and I had his phone number, and we had many conversations, and not only about wrestling, but about Christ. And if there was anybody that was genuine, it definitely was Ivan Koloff. I'm moving on in the remaining couple minutes we got here, Tommy. Let's. What were your interactions with the late Abe Jacobs, who passed away in 2023.
Another just a beautiful soul. What a great man he was. I didn't know him when he was in the business, but he worked at Ricky Steamboat's gym. You know, he was the guy up front, and more times than in there and not even work out and just sit down and listen to stories of his days in the business, and just a charismatic, funny guy. He loved to eat garlic, so he always smelled like garlic, but just a beautiful soul. What a great man he was.
Yeah, Abe Jacobs. For those of you that don't know, look him up on YouTube. Abe Jacobs was not only a great wrestler, but a very, very kind and just one decent human being, just like Ivan Koloff was. And the last name before we close it out, and this hits home for me pretty much. So give me a second here, but Don Kernodle passed away in 2021 of suicide, and I know you mentioned Don was instrumental in one of the ones that you met back in your days when you were trying to train. Once you got into the business, what were your memories of Don as a wrestler and as a human being?
He had the gimmick, you know, USA, USSR, that whole thing with Ivan and Nikita. So he was a great baby face outside the ring, just a great guy. It turned out, you know, talk about a small world. I was living in Raintree, Charlotte, and his brother Rocky lived in the next condos over, and they're literally next door neighbors. So Don would come over occasionally, but I became pretty good friends with his brother Rocky Canoodle. But yeah, we both of them great times. And there's like a fun fact nobody knows, but Don and Rocky were on America's Most Funniest Videos. They had their little dachshund that would soap it up and it would get all angry and show its teeth. And I think they won 10 grand, but they didn't win the final grand prize. But, you know, that was Rocky's dog. And I was like, that's the dog that's been on America's Funniest Home Videos. He's like, that's right.
Yeah, it's sad that so many of the guys that we talked about here, Abe, Ivan, and Don, are no longer with us, and it's even more sad when people like your father and Don, and then another lady that you didn't know, Ashley Massaro, that worked in WWF. She also committed suicide, but I guess there are just a lot of things to close this out. I guess with suicide, it's just like anything else in the world. God doesn't promise that we'll know everything, I suppose. And for some reason, they made that choice. And I just hope that somehow there's a way that your father and Don and Ivan and others, whether they committed suicide or they passed on for some other reason, I hope that they, are at peace wherever they are in heaven.
Absolutely. That's the most important thing I've gleaned from all of this, is that just make sure you tell everybody around you in your life every day that you love them, because as you stated, we're not guaranteed tomorrow. We're not promised. So love with all you have today.
And while both of us love the wrestling business and will always love our time around it, there are more things important than the wrestling business, and that's faith in God and love in your family and things of that nature. So anyway, I'm about to lose it here. So and I've kept you for a couple minutes over an hour, so I better let you go so I don't get in trouble with the wife. But Tommy, thanks again, man. As I figure this out more, thank you for being my first test case. And as I figure this out more, we might try to have you back on for a part two sometime down the road, man. Thanks
Sounds
much.
great, brother. Love you.